What's up, guys? I'm DJ Swivel, and on this week's episode of Just the Tips, we're going to be talking about studio etiquette. How do you act when you're in a studio with an artist? But before we get started, make sure you like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, leave a comment, run the intro. What's up, guys? My name is DJ Swivel, and welcome back for another episode of Just the Tips. On this week's episode, I got a really great question from one of the viewers in my comments on the YouTube asking if I could do a video about studio etiquette. And so that's exactly what we're going to talk about, studio etiquette. It's not always like common sense, how you act around an artist, how you sort of treat studio sessions, especially if you didn't go to school for it. You can kind of feel a little overwhelmed sometimes in the studio. So the whole purpose of this video is to sort of demystify that. It really is not that complicated, just some very common sense things that you can do to ensure that you have a good working relationship with the artist that you are working with. So where do we start? Well, the first thing before you even get into the studio is the business, right? If you're coming in the studio, there should be a mutual understanding over how exactly you guys are handling the business. If you're a producer, maybe you're just going in to collaborate and you're not talking business and you'll let the managers handle that later. If you're an engineer, typically engineers get paid a day rate or an hourly rate. And so you want to make sure that that communication has all happened before you get to the studio. Because if you get to the studio, it's never going to work out in your favor. So you got to make sure that you have a very clear understanding of how the business is going to work. So once you figure that out, then it comes time for the actual session. So the first thing I like to tell people is get there early. It's like the most common sense thing ever. Get there early, find your bearings, make sure that you know all the different elements of the room. Every studio is a little different. Every studio does things a little bit differently. You want to make sure that you can get set up and functioning and ready to go before the artist shows up. So when the artist shows up, you're ready for anything that they throw at you. So that's first thing. Make sure you get to the studio early, at least half an hour early. Give yourself the time to prepare. While you're there early and you're preparing, you want to do a few things. One, make sure that your session or whatever you're doing is set up. If you're starting from scratch, open up a session, import your templates or whatever you like to have at your disposal ready. And that means when the artist comes in, you're ready to work right away if the artist wants to work. Some of the other things you want to do is if you've worked with the artist before, you know who you're working with, or you've spoken to their management or friend or whoever, try to get an understanding of what the artist likes. You want to set the mood, get the lighting right. If you're doing a late session, you probably don't want very bright lights. You probably want it nice, dimly lit. Maybe you want to light some candles, just get the vibe going. Perhaps their manager has told them or told you about certain foods that they like or drinks that they like. And so usually if you're dealing with a record label, they'll pay for those things, of course. If you're working directly with the artist, maybe you want to have a few things on hand, whether it's a certain soda or a certain snack, just something for the artist to like. Most artists have a rider when they go into the studio. There's like a rider of what they need. If you're working at a big professional studio, there's often going to be assistants there who will help you get set up and get everything that you need. So you will always have support, but you want to make sure that by the time the artist walks in, everything is perfect and they're ready to work if they want to work right away. So that's kind of the first two things. Get there early and make sure you set the vibe and make sure the artist is as comfortable as they want to be. The next thing you really want to do is sort of like, you have to adapt to the artist, right? Unless you're some major producer and you are sort of the A side in the relationship, you really want to make sure you cater to how the artist chooses to work. And every artist works differently. Some artists like to write on the microphone. And so if you're engineering, you're constantly there recording every single thing that they do, and you got to keep that organized and know where every take is, and you don't want to lose any takes because sometimes that magic is in that take that you accidentally delete, and then the artist is upset. So you want to make sure you're capturing everything, but work the way that the artist wants you to work. So I've had certain artists who, I remember years ago I was working with A. and she has her own language that she teaches her engineers before she even gets in the booth with them. So I can't remember everything, but I remember she would say something like flip. And flip means flip the previous take with the most recent take. And she would have all these like little one-word things so that she could quickly communicate what she wanted, and the engineer would understand exactly what she meant and know how to do it. So she spends about 10 minutes just teaching you that before she gets in the booth. I thought that was interesting. First and only time that's ever happened. But the point is, you want to adapt to however the artist works. In some cases, it's easy. If you're working with a rapper, maybe they just want the beat on loop. So you just have to loop the section of the beat that they're writing to, and then you just kind of hang out and keep your eyes open and make sure that you're sort of anticipating what they're going to need. And that sort of leads us to our next tip, which is anticipate the artist's needs. And it's not just the artist's needs, it's the artist and whoever they bring. At the end of the day, everybody who comes in with the artist is an equal to the artist, right? You can't just treat the artist great and ignore the friends or homies or whoever is in the studio, girlfriend maybe, whatever. You got to make sure everybody who comes in with the artist is all treated exceptionally well. And if the artist is sitting writing to a beat, you're kind of just watching the room, keeping an eye out of what's going on and trying to anticipate. Certain artists have various habits where when they're ready to record, you can kind of see them start to move in their chair, or they maybe start to stand up. If they're starting to stand up and look like they're going to the booth, you want to make sure you get to the booth and make sure the microphone is at the approximate height that it needs to be, and make sure the pop filter's there, and all of those things. To be honest, those things should be done as part of your 30 minutes while you're prepping the room. But regardless, if the artist is ready to record, you want to walk them into the booth, make sure they know where everything is, show them where their headphone volume is, any sort of things that they have control over in the booth, lighting, for example. You want to make sure that they feel as comfortable as possible and you're kind of anticipating their needs. If you've worked with the artist before, also, you need to make sure you remember what it is that how they worked before, what it is that they like, what they don't like, so that you don't make those mistakes again. I see all the time, engineers or sometimes producers will make the same mistake over and over again, recurring out of a force of habit. And that's a real quick way to get fired, because most cases, it's not even that you're doing a bad job. It's just the artist wants to be as comfortable as possible. The studio is their sanctuary. And if there's anything that you do that bothers them even a little bit, they're going to find somebody else who doesn't bother them. So moving forward, speaking of things that bother artists, there's just general common sense, like, make sure you brush your teeth before you go to the studio. Make sure you've got fresh clothes on and, you have your deodorant on, all the just general hygiene stuff. I know that seems like a very simple thing, but you'd be surprised. Some of y'all are nasty. And, artists don't want to deal with that. If you're in a really, enclosed, in a closed environment with an artist like that, they are experiencing everything with you. And if they don't get a good vibe from you, if you smell or if, you talk out of turn or anything like that, those are going to be things that make them not want to bring you back. So you want to make sure you are generally, definitely clean, generally quiet, right? Only kind of speak when spoken to. Try to anticipate what the artist needs, but don't try to do too much. And obviously, a lot of this depends on what role you're playing. If you're an engineer, you definitely want to be a sponge. Just kind of be quiet, listen to what they want, do what they need, and as you grow with them, as your relationship builds over a number of sessions, you'll start to get more familiar with the artist, more accustomed to what they do, and of course, you'll have more freedom to be able to speak up and things like that. When you're a producer, there's a bit more of a collaborative role there between an artist and a producer, and so of course there's going to be a lot more creative communication. So this is one of those little boxes that engineers often get put in. They're not always relied on for the creative side, even though most engineers, in my experience, are very creative people. That's not technically what they're in the studio for. So if you're not technically there for that, just keep that stuff to yourself until you are familiar enough with the artist where you understand the vibe that they're putting out, and when it's acceptable for you to sort of give them an idea or something like that. So those are kind of like the major, the major things to really go over. But once the session is done now, so now you've like recorded the session, hopefully it's all gone smoothly, whether you're a producer, engineer, everything's done, you've captured all the audio. The next thing is you want to make sure you don't lose any files. And I mean, this goes, of course, like during the recording session, record everything, like literally everything. You're always recording. But then in the end of the session, when the artist leaves, you want to make sure you do a backup. Because if you lose those files, now they've wasted a day. And that's a lot of money. They're paying you, they're paying the studio, they're paying, friends and people around them. They're spending a lot of money to be in the studio. So if you lose those files, it's on you. And that's a big problem. And I've seen it happen before. I've seen people get fired for that. So you have to be very, very organized, very diligent with doing your backups and making sure that you have redundancy. So you don't have, you might have 2 hard drives. You might have it on a cloud storage now. But you got to make sure that you back up all that audio. And then once you've kind of done all that, that's kind of it. Like that is the general, those are kind of the, 5 or 6 rules there that I live by to make sure that a session goes well with an artist. But again, the most important thing is like read the room. If you're not familiar with the artist, kind of take a step back and be more quiet and just generally read the room and try to anticipate everything the artist is going to want to need. And if you can do that and do that successfully, I guarantee you the artist is going to want to have you back. Because that's a very hard skill to perfect. You're really just paying attention to every single, like, not just verbal cues, but, body language cues. And you start to pick up on the things that the artist wants without them even having to tell you. And it will get to a point where you can literally run a whole session without even speaking to the artist. You will just know them so well that you're ahead of everything that they want to do. And that's like the goal you want to ultimately get to. But it starts with just paying attention, keeping your mouth shut, and just doing the best job you can possibly do. And artists will recognize that hard work. They will recognize how much effort you're putting in. So make sure you put in the effort, and you'll probably stick around. So this is a shorter episode of Just the Tips, but I thought that those were some very important things for anybody who is starting a career in music, going to work at a studio, working with an artist, being a producer, whatever. Studio etiquette, working with an artist, those things are skills that you need to learn, and you need to learn them quickly and well if you want to have a good career. So I am DJ Swivel. That is Just the Tips for this week, and I'll see you again in a few weeks. Peace.